was crazy. I was like, oh my god, like, so we just spent like a good 15 minutes in this scene, but you're gonna tell me that that's it? Like, you're never gonna see that. I decided to do kind of like a review series from like a different point of view, more of like a casual moviegoer experience. Just kind of gave you my honest opinion about movies from an entertainment perspective. Now, I wanted to start with this movie because I am actually a huge Studio Ghibli fan. I discovered Studio Ghibli when I was like a little kid, and one night, late at night, I was scrolling through the channels and I just saw this crazy movie playing. And I was like, holy crap, this movie is crazy. I was just a kid. I think I was like 7 years old. And I just see this like massive, violent boar, like covered in blood and worms. And it was the most like disturbing, scary movie I could think of at that time. But at the same time, I just absolutely loved that movie. And of course, I'm talking about Princess Mononoke. That was probably my first time seeing a Studio Ghibli movie. But even though as a little kid, it had like this huge impact on me and I was like, this is crazy. I absolutely fell in love with it as a kid. And there was only so much I could register about the movie because I was still young. And I remember when I revisited that film, there were so many different levels, right, to Princess Mononoke and that movie, what it had to say about humanity and spirits and war and like the kind of like the gray zones of war and all of that. It was like very interesting. And so because of that, I was very excited about this film in particular because Studio Ghibli had put out a lot of films recently, but they were less fantastical than kind of like what we're used to. So I remember I saw The Wind Rises, and even though it had some cool, you know, imaginative sequences that were from like a subjective point of view, it was a story pretty much based on reality. I saw the trailer for this movie, and first of all, I didn't even know that Studio Ghibli was still making movies. I thought Hayao Miyazaki had retired. And so when I saw this, I was like, oh wow, I'm super excited. And I had just seen the new Godzilla movie, which I thought was amazing, okay? And I went to Japan this year. I wanted more Japanese content because I thought Godzilla was amazing and I kind of wanted this to continue that streak, right? So I went into this movie, I was very excited. I had high expectations. And I went with my sister, who is not an anime fan. In fact, she thought Princess Mononoke was like too like gory for her. Even just that movie, she thought it was like too gory for her, like with all the worms coming out of the animals and stuff like that. And she hasn't seen like a lot of the other movies. And then she also brought a friend with her who is more of like an anime fan and has seen the other Ghibli movies. So, you know, I came with them and I was interested in what they would have to say about this movie when it was over. But I was expecting myself to enjoy it and have a good time and think that this movie was very good because it was getting very good reviews. And I saw it after its opening, right? And the first week that this movie opened, it actually made like good amount of money. So I was expecting this movie to be really good because the trailer looked very fantastical and very fast-paced. So what did I think about this movie? Okay, I thought that this movie, from a technical point of view, was awesome. I thought that the animation in this movie was awesome. You know, Studio Ghibli, it's a very experienced studio. They have such a solid style that is instantly recognizable. So it's always fun to go back to that style that you instantly recognize from like when you were growing up watching these movies. I think my favorite thing about Ghibli animation is anytime there's any kind of like gooey liquid, like they have so much fun with all the stuff that's like gooey and liquidy. So I thought that the animation, once again, was delightful. And I also thought that the sound design was amazing. So I watched this movie in IMAX and it was a very big screen. But I just remember the sound on this movie being absolutely amazing. My favorite scene, just from the sound perspective, this was not my favorite scene in the movie, but just from a sound perspective was when the king parakeet and he's like just flashing through this like wooden pathway. And the sound of that scene was like so good. However, I did not think that this movie was good from an entertaining point of view. And I wanted to make this video mostly to like kind of explain where I'm coming from, but also because I'm curious how people feel about this movie, because this movie is getting a lot of good praise from press and reviewers. I don't know if the fans necessarily feel the same way. So I'm curious what you guys think, like if you guys are fans of Ghibli movies or if you're just casual viewers, because I'm gonna give you the reasons why I didn't like the movie. One of the reasons I didn't like this movie is I think that the pacing of this movie is extremely slow. Animated movies typically have very fast pacing because animation is expensive, so you want to animate only what you absolutely need for your movie. Particularly the first act of this movie was so excruciatingly slow. You know, we get this kid who is dealing with the trauma of the loss of his mother. And unfortunately, because he's dealing with that trauma, he's like very quiet. Okay, he's very quiet. He doesn't speak a lot, and like he doesn't communicate a lot with the people around him. And that, as a choice for your protagonist, right there, like that puts your movie at a disadvantage. Because, you know, like when you look at other movies like House, Moving Castle, and Spirited Away, like you had these very like colorful protagonists, you know, that had a lot to say, that were witty. In a movie like Spirited Away, like I feel like the inciting incident happens like so early in the movie, and it's kind of like a non-stop roller coasting of this girl having to deal with all these spirits like coming at her and like making her do things, right? But I felt like in this movie, like the character of Mahito, who's the main character, he was just a very quiet character because of the nature of the conflict that he's dealing with. Now, that could be okay, but I felt like the pacing around around him kind of matched his low energy. So the beginning of this movie, I felt like nothing was happening. They kept building up this like mystery, the heron, right? The character of the heron, because the movie is called The Boy and the Heron. And they kept building up the mystery of this like heron, that he kept seeing this heron in the distance. And they build up the heron as this like powerful, fantastical creatures. And then there's a scene that the heron is like, your presence is requested, your presence is requested. And there's all these like animals and frogs and like all of this power. Like this heron is so powerful, right? But it just takes so long to like set up this heron as this like powerful thing. Like it takes so many different instances of him like coming across this heron. Later in the movie, we find out that the heron is this like just funny side character, like comic relief, pathetic old person. And I think for a movie called The Boy and the Heron, to make the heron like such a pathetic character, and his character is not like a nice character. He's like a clown, but he also has very bad intentions, right? So like this guy is someone that can be trusted, that he's not looking out for the best interests of the character. So he's kind of in the movie, and like you don't really want to like deal with him because he's just this like awful person of a character. He's not epic as he was set up in like the first act of the movie, and he's just a clown. And for a movie called The Boy and the Heron, it felt like those two characters were like the weakest characters in the film. Because the boy, I thought that he was just too passive and quiet of a character, and I thought the heron was like a clownish character. Like those two characters, they just didn't work for me. Another thing I didn't like was that the fact that he like self-harms in this movie in like a very violent way. I thought that was a little bit too crazy for like a movie like this. I think that if you're bringing like your kids to something like this, they're gonna be very confused, and they're not gonna understand like why he's doing something like that. And I didn't think that it warranted it. Like it's like, yeah, he goes to school one day and it doesn't go well one day, but he seemed to not be like trying at all to like fit in or get along to the people in his house. So just seeing him like in a bad mood in the house was kind of like a bummer, right? Now he is sent to live with his dad and the wife of his dad, the new wife of his dad, because his mom passed away. And one thing that I was not sure about is if that woman is Mahito's mom's sister, right? So if was that woman Mahito's aunt, because that she calls sister to Mahito's mom at some points in the movie. So I was like very confused if the dad was banging his dead wife's younger sister. That was confusing. Okay, so then they introduce the idea of this tower, right? There's this mysterious tower and no one seems to be able to like get in the tower. And then Mahito goes in the tower, and then like the heron, it's like luring him in, right? So you think, oh wow, there's a reason why this heron wants this boy. And we are trying to understand the heron's motivation, and that's all very interesting. But then they get into an altercation, and this is where the movie kind of lost me a little bit, because it seems that the heron is following the orders of this mysterious wizard in the tower, who we later learn is Mahito's uncle, right? So it seems the heron is following his orders, but then the heron tries to kill Mahito. And I was like, why is the heron trying to kill Mahito? Like, what does he gain from doing that? Why is the heron trying to fight this kid and like kill him? So that to me didn't make any sense. Like, why would that be his motivation? Why wouldn't the heron just like kill anybody else? Why wouldn't he just eat off anybody else? So that to me was never explained. And then, right, the heron is ordered by this man that he must be Mahito's guide, right? But then later in the movie, we see the Heron still trying to hurt Mahito, try to betray him, right? So I never understood the Heron's motivations. Like, after Mahito goes in the tower, this is when the movie kind of gets interesting for me. Mahito is like searching for his mom, right? So that's his whole motivation for going in the tower, is to find out what happened to his mom and possibly rescue his aunt, who might be his mom's sister. I'm still not sure about that, but she's pregnant and has like a baby. And we never quite learn why she was in the tower in the first place. Why was the aunt in the tower? Like, we never found out why she went there. Like, was she like tricked by somebody? It didn't make any sense. I don't think it was explained. And if it was, I maybe missed it because there was so much going on. But that was another mystery that was kind of like never fully explored, right? Like, she was, you know, trapped in this prison with like paper traps. But it was never explained why she went there in the first place. Now, we do know that the people that are descendants of that first guy that built the tower have a special kind of attraction to the tower because he made a deal with this rock. But those are kind of like connections that you have to make on your own, because the movie, the fact that that mystery kind of never gets explained, it just drove me crazy. So one of the things I hated about this movie is that it introduces so many ideas about the world that they go to this parallel dimension, which is like this like magical dimension where souls are made and everything. They introduce so many ideas, but then they kind of leave you at that. And I think the biggest example I can think of, and this bothered me so much. So in the trailer for this movie, which I thought the trailer for this movie was so epic and so fast-paced, and I had great expectations. But there's a scene in the trailer where we see this like golden gate. The way it's put in the trailer, right? It seems like an entrance to somewhere very important, or like a seal guarding some kind of powerful entity or whatever. But it seemed important in the trailer, right? This golden gate. And then when Mahito gets sent down to this parallel dimension, we see this golden gate, and he goes through the golden gate, and then all these pelicans attack him, and they force open the gates. And then he's inside the gates, and the pelicans can't eat him for some reason. They explain why the pelicans couldn't eat him. I forgot the reason why. But then we see like the Kiriko character from the parallel dimension, which is a younger Kiriko. She comes in and she says, "Why do you open the gate? Why do you break the seal? Oh my God, like this is like a sacred gate." And we're like, and then she does this ritual with the fire stick. And she does this it's very interesting, right? The way she does the ritual. But then they just hop off the island. And we never see that gate ever again. What was that? Like that was such an interesting part of the movie. That was like even visually, that's such an interesting thing to like open this gate that you're not supposed to open. And they show it in the trailer like so much, so extensively, so mysteriously. Like, what was this gate? And they just open it, and then they do like this quick ritual. They don't explain what the ritual was for. And then they just hop off the island and go somewhere else. And that to me was crazy. I was like, oh my God, like, so we just spent like a good 15 minutes in this scene, but you're gonna tell me that that's it? Like, we're never gonna see that place again, ever? There were so many moments in this movie where things like that happen. Like, they introduce this very interesting idea, and then they drop it off and they never mention it again. So like, this is the reason why this movie didn't work for me, is because in the world building that they do, they have so many elements that they introduce, and you're kind of piqued and you have interest about it, and then they just move on to something else. And then move on to something else. And by the end of the movie, the questions that you had at the beginning, like the movie moves on to be about this like powerful magical meteorite that arrived, and it's like a whole different movie to what everything else was. I have more examples of these, by the way. Mahito falls on the ocean, okay, and the first thing we see are these like ships. And it's a very important visual in the film because we see the ships in the distance. They explain that they're like illusions, right? They're like ghost ships. But that's it. Like, they never go into detail about what that entails. Like, can you get on those ships? Are they just like a visual, image? Like, why? Like, if that's like a visual image, why is it there? Is it because the great uncle likes ships and he wanted that to be part of his world that he designed? Like, we never learn. We never learned. She just says like, the Kiriko character, she just says like, oh no, those are like ghost ships. But we keep seeing them, right? Like, they make such a big emphasis on them, but then they never address them again. That is another thing that they never address. Then Mahito and Kiriko, they fish this like huge fish. Okay, and this is a fish that it's obviously not from the real world. It's this fish from like the spirit world, And Kiriko says like, oh, like she's the only one that can like kill things, and that the ocean is like poisoned, right? Never addressed why the ocean was poisoned. Such an interesting thing to like throw in there. Like it's like, yeah, our ocean, it's like cursed. And it's like, you have to be aware of the ocean because the ocean here is like cursed. But then they never follow through on why that was. And so then we follow Kiriko to her hideout, which is this very cool ship in a swamp. And then we see these like black ghosts, and you know, they're ghosts, I guess, but they're the people that we're gonna sell the fish to. But then we never see like what they do with the fish. We never see like what they are exactly. They're just ghosts that are there. They're introduced. They're rowing their boats. We don't learn anything else about the ghosts. That's something else that was thrown in, not developed. So then we meet the Wara Wara, which are these like white spirits that supposedly are the souls of the people being born on Earth. And that to me was super interesting. It added value and meaning to this alternate world that these people were in, right? It added stakes. It's like, whoa, this world, it's kind of important because this is where the souls of the new people on Earth are created, right? So that's like a big stake, right? Like the souls of the individuals on Earth, they're created in this world. So this world that we don't know a lot of information about, it's kind of important, right? That I liked. And then, right, we see like the pelicans eating the Wara Wara, and that was like pretty shocking because like, oh wow, they're eating like the souls of the people that are gonna be born. That's pretty bad, right? So that kind of created like, okay, like this world is important. Like this world, like there's relevance to it. It's not just some like side adventure. So we see the Wara Wara going up into the sky, and you think that they're gonna be like an important plot point in the movie because it's such a high stake, but they're not. You know, they were not a big important point in the movie. Instead, it became about this like parakeets and this like parakeet king. And like, does anybody care about this parakeet kingdom? It was just more of this like silly thing with these birds that like to eat humans. And again, like the things that were interesting and were set up in the second act, right? The ghost ships, the ocean being poisoned, that golden gate that was guarding some spirit. Even the Wara Wara, like those ideas are just left behind completely, and the movie moves into something else completely. They introduced the concept of a meteorite, a cosmic meteorite with magic powers, but they introduced it in like the third act of this movie. And by the third act, there was so much already going on in this movie that I thought it was just too late to introduce this idea of like a cosmic meteorite with like parallel dimensions to like different worlds. It was like adding a lot of, you know, new lore to this world that was already so filled with other questions that you have. And then they added this too late down in the movie. So that's something else that I was like, no, I'm not having this. And then at the end of the movie, I'm just gonna fast forward a little bit because I don't want to drag on too long. But at the end of the movie, the main character is given an option, right? He is given an option by his grand uncle to kind of take over the world. The world, it's kind of like falling apart, and they need like a fresh hand to come in and kind of like stabilize it a little bit because the world only has like a day left. Now, when you're watching that unfold, you think that that is a powerful conflict because either Mahito stays and fixes this world, or he leaves and then the world crumbles. But when you're watching it, you think, wow, like if this world gets destroyed, there are going to be massive consequences, right? Because the Wara Wara, the souls of the new people being born, like those are gonna get destroyed. So what's gonna happen to the people being born? Are there gonna be no more births in the world because the Wara Wara were destroyed? So that world, that alternate dimension that had ghosts and souls and spirits, it seemed important. Like it seemed like it needed to be saved. But by the end of the movie, spoilers, that world gets completely destroyed. It all collapses. The tower collapses. There's like no more magic left. Not only are there like no consequences to the real world, even every single parakeet that was inside, even every single being that was inside gets out safely. And it's kind of like, wow, like that whole world was just like a hassle to go with. And it should have been destroyed a long time ago because there are no consequences, right? Who cares if the Wara Wara get destroyed? Who cares? Like it has no impact on the real world. And then the real world, it's like totally chilling, totally back to normal. His dad was cool. He was a cool dude. But I thought it was interesting that they kept showing the machinery that his dad was building. And the movie keeps saying like, wow, this is important, like this is for war. So we know his dad is like a war manufacturer. They had so many scenes showing the little machines that his dad was building that looked like kind of like a glass cover of some sort for some machines, and then it's like it has nothing to do with the movie. You know, it's like another random thing thrown in this movie that didn't add to the film. I mean, his dad ultimately goes in at the end to like try to save him. There were so many scenes like setting that up and nothing happened with it, that I was also like, that didn't make sense. In conclusion, I thought that this movie suffered from three things. The first thing was the slow pacing, especially in the first act of this movie when they're setting up this heron mystery, you know, and they're taking just too long to like reveal what the whole mystery with the heron is. And ultimately, the character of the heron doesn't pay off. He's this silly character who is not a great guy, and you don't really care for him that much. And you kind of wish that he just went away in the middle of the movie. There's a point in the movie that you're like, we don't need this heron character anymore. Like, you literally feel like you don't need it in the movie for what the movie is trying to say and what the movie actually is, which is the relationship between Mahito and his granduncle and his mom. The heron just becomes irrelevant, and you're just annoyed that he's gotta stick around because he's in the title of the movie. I thought that the pacing was bad. I thought that the main two characters are bad. I thought Mahito and the heron were not great characters. I thought Mahito was just very absent character, very quiet character. I mean, he gets a little more assertive towards the end of the movie. I don't think he was very charismatic or very like interesting to follow around. And I thought that the third problem of the movie, it was just so many ideas are introduced and not developed, right? So the whole spirituality of this universe is not explored. I mean, I get it, it's an alternative world, but it gets destroyed and there doesn't seem to be stakes. The Wara Wara are introduced, and it's such a cool concept that these beings are the souls of new people being born. But then that world gets destroyed, and what happened to those Wara Wara? I mean, they're gone, like they're destroyed, but there doesn't seem to be consequences in the real world. So the whole conflict of should Mahito take over this world, it's when you watch this movie already, there's no weight to that conflict. The answer is no, he should not, because this world is not important. There are no repercussions if Mahito just leaves and this world gets destroyed. There's nothing of weight waiting on Mahito to take that post. So ultimately, I thought that this movie wasn't entertaining, was very slow, and the main characters were not great. You know, I was not surprised that both of the people I went with thought the same thing. My sister hated this movie. It was very confusing for her because she's not used to Studio Ghibli films. But also my friend who likes anime, he also saw this movie and he was just not that entertained by it. So for me, it's very surprising to see like critics just adoring this movie and just going crazy for this movie. So that was what I wanted to say about this movie. I'm sorry, it's a little bit of a rant, but you know, I like to have this sort of discussions with people, because a lot of the times I feel like critics are on their own little bubble and they just look at movies differently and they forget the entertainment factor of a movie. And that is what ultimately movies are for. They're a form of entertainment. And unfortunately for this movie, I did not get much of it here. But I'm curious to know what you guys thought, so let me know, and I'll see you guys in the next one.